Alright, hey, it's Brother Christopher. Thanks for tuning in on our first experience with a flipped classroom lecture. Wanted to do this so we had enough time to work on our other projects in class. It's important we watch this video and come prepared on Tuesday so we can work on spiders, Yellowstone, and filming for Saints. Busy week, let's go. So last week, we looked at Yellowstone National Park and the introduction of wolves. We watched a video how wolves change rivers. You were supposed to listen to Wolves at the Door from NPR over the weekend. If you haven't, do that soon. And we read the articles, Has the reintroduction of wolves really saved Yellowstone? And is the wolf a real American hero? So we've seen this is a very complex issue. We can reach the point that this is a possible explanation, but not a total explanation. However, this is only part of the story. Animals don't recognize the invisible lines that we call boundaries. So we need to consider what is the human side of this. Stakeholders is any person who has a vested interest in a topic. For example, I am a stakeholder in your education, as are you, as are your parents. So we're going to look at who are the stakeholders in this question of Yellowstone National Park and the reintroduction of wolves and their effect. To do that, we're going to study the deer population in northeast United States. In this area, the large predators have been driven out for likely decades, if not centuries. The deer populations now are out of control, causing problems with overgrazing, disease, and interactions with humans, especially with vehicle collisions. So who are some people that have concerns with this population? Well, let's think. Residents, farmers, insurance companies even, state agencies, farmers, ranchers, anyone who lives in this area, especially in the rural areas and the edges of the suburbs, likely is having problems with these large numbers of deer. This is a very complicated problem. Can I see this flow chart going on? Let's break this down one step at a time. At the very top here, this is anthropogenic activities. That means human activities. So humans hunt deer, we drove out the predators, different landowners use different tactics to deal with deer. Some attract deer with food, others try to get rid of them. And large-scale development, meaning huge tracts of land which used to be forest or pasture land are now being used to develop human structures, roads, malls, business complexes, housing developments. All of these reduce the amount of land available to deer, even as their numbers increase. So these human activities result in broad ecological effects. Changes in the deer population dynamics, diseases, breeding, interactions between herds, which contribute to further habit alteration, overgrazing, for example. So these cause deer effects on humans. These might be adverse, they might be something good. But all these lead to habituation, that is, deer becoming used to humans being around. Again, food conditioning means some people actually set food out for deer, enjoying seeing them in their property. However, this only draws more deer into human-dense areas, which amplify deer vehicle collisions, loss of vegetation, wild, agricultural, or in gardens and landscaping, garbage spread from when deer get into garbage, and also disease and parasites. There are many deer, far more than would be because there are no natural predators. It's important to note these are perceptions of specific impacts. When looking at stakeholders, it's important to consider what are their perceptions in addition to what is the reality. So all of these are different levels where different stakeholders are going to be concerned. But this bottom row, these specific impacts, is something very important to the general population. Stakeholders in Yellowstone. We're going to adapt that last framework to another situation. We're going to look at how is this going to play out in Yellowstone. So we'll talk through it in this video, and then during your work time or as homework, you're going to select one group of stakeholders and consider what do they think about wolves in Yellowstone, and what do we need to add to this framework to make it better. Not to make it better, but to fill it in, to make it fit our situation. Stakeholders. By quickly thinking about it, I considered 4 major groups of stakeholders. Park rangers and park officials, ecologists, people who study the wild nature and its interactions with human nature for that matter, tourists, people who pay a fair amount of money to travel to these remote locations in Yellowstone to see wildlife, to experience the grand vistas of Yellowstone National Park, and also ranchers. Not sure where this picture's from, but it's pretty impressive. I'd be a rancher if that was my backyard. So these 4 groups of people, and there are likely others, have a vested interest in the population of wolves in Yellowstone Park. Whether they want them there or not, either way they are stakeholders in this conversation. Alright, so let's adapt this table we looked at a few minutes ago. Start with human activities first, then move into broad ecological effects, interactions between wolves and people, and wolves getting used to humans, and perceptions of specific impacts. This framework isn't quite perfect for our purposes, but it gives us a starting point. So human activities. Well, first we hunted them, then we eradicated them. We completely drove them out of the majority of the continental United States. And then 25 some odd years ago, we brought them back. We reintroduced the wolves. There are landowner practices, especially among the ranchers on the outside boundaries of the park, and also how the park itself is managed are all human activities. These lead to broad ecological effects. Habitat alteration. We looked at the observations that the rivers are changing behavior in Yellowstone, opening the question, are wolves one of the responsible agents, or are there other effects going on? And because there are wolves, this changes species behaviors, especially the ungulates, that is the deer and antelope, moose, elk, what have you. The presence of predators changes their behavior. Their behavior likely will change the plant structures across the park. Wolf effects on humans. This probably is itself a minor thing, given that wolves are very shy of humans for the most part. They like to keep their distance. However, as their numbers grow, and Yellowstone is a very densely or heavily visited area, there may be some effects in the future, especially if people are careless in the wild. But the wolves eventually will get used to humans. They will not likely always stay fearful if they know that humans bring food with them, or if humans are good at finding where the deer herds are. The wolves may learn to follow humans to watch the deer and to get a tasty snack. These are possibilities. I'm speculating, but I think I'm not too far off base. But these are going to lead to specific impacts. Whether the wolves are the culprits or not, ranchers will blame them for loss of livestock, and sometimes it is the case wolves will prey on livestock. They may interfere with other park activities. There will be a decrease in ungulate herds, those are the deer and the elk. What other perceptions, whatever specific impacts might be attributed to them? Well, as we saw, it may also include the changes in the river systems. Again, this is a perceived impact. The question remains, is it really responsible to wolves, but it is nonetheless a perception. So again, this is the framework adapted slightly to our purposes. Your task now is to go back to consider the different stakeholders and say, which of these 4 do I want to consider their perspective on, based on what we've read and studied in class. Excellent. Come to class tomorrow, on Tuesday, ready to talk about these stakeholders for a little while before we break into our individual projects and work groups. God bless.